All right. Just got back from shooting a little bit of Anamorphic with the new update on the Sony FX3 and something I've been waiting to get my hands on for longer than I can remember, the Moment 1.33 Anamorphic adapter. Now, this video isn't sponsored, but Moment did send this over for my own use, I guess. I've definitely been asking them if I could borrow one for quite a long time, and I'm obviously very excited to get this in my hands and try it out and obviously put something out to you guys. So if you have any more questions, I may be doing a follow-up video to this because this is mostly gonna be like my first impressions and some kind of just initial testing that I've done with this thing. So first off, this is its own set of lenses. There's plenty of glass in here. It is very, very large and heavy. That is going to be a detriment to some, but for me, I think it makes it really, really interesting because if you do like the look of this, then you're going to be able to just use it on a ton of different stuff and not just be stuck buying a whole, I guess, set of different anamorphic lenses. You can possibly just use them on your existing lenses, depending on, I guess, your use case. So how this works is the front of this is an 82mm diameter, and oddly, the back end is a 67mm adapter. So you actually have step down rings that come with it. So you literally just screw it on here. Now, this is the 35 1.4 GM, and there is a little button on the side of the adapter that allows you, once you've screwed it on enough, to align it correctly. Most of the lenses have some sort of marking to show you. There's a little red dot right here that allows you to know that you're aligned, and basically you're kind of ready to go. Obviously, it's really large, but you can either do something like this, where you rig up a little mount system and a support where you can have this like this and your focus is still able to move, no problem. Obviously, I didn't actually mount that on there specifically. Or if you just want to hand hold it, you can kind of hold it in between, mainly so you're not putting too much pressure on the end threads of the lens you're using and then the mount to the camera body, because obviously this is just a really big setup. Now, one of the things that they said in kind of like their marketing material and things is they usually kind of set it as a Super 35 adapter, but also could be used in full frame at like 50mm and up. Now, what I've found is that in all of my testing, a lot of you have watched videos on me adapting lenses across platforms. It's mostly dependent on the lens you're actually using in front of the camera, not necessarily the focal length exactly. Case in point, I actually used this on my medium format GFX camera and it mostly covered that sensor, but that's based off of the 65mm f1.4 lens that more than covers the GFX sensor, meaning that once you stick this adapter in front of it, you're also adapting over that same sensor in a much larger way as well. So things like this 35 1.4 aren't supposed to work, and it doesn't really work. But also, if you use something like Sony's clear image zoom to zoom in just a little bit into the image, then it actually does work pretty well. So today I took it out into the woods and made some sample images. Obviously, we started with the 35 1.4. It mostly covers. It doesn't all the way cover, but especially if you punch in just a little bit, it's definitely usable, which means that on a Super 35, it absolutely will cover. And what was most interesting to me is that the concept here is that you're supposed to focus the normal lens to infinity, and then you just use the front ring of the adapter as it is. And all of the markings are generally going to be pretty close. But what I decided to do was get my focus kind of pretty darn close to where I wanted it to be, and then actually left the camera on autofocus. And then I didn't want to leave this there for too long because I didn't have a support on it, but I jumped in front of the camera and it still autofocused on me. Now, you're not going to be doing big autofocus pulls or anything, But if you did need to film something like an interview or just someone that's moving slightly therein and you wanted to just kind of like let it automate itself, I'm not saying that you could, but I'm saying that it's a possibility. So on top of the 35, we used the 50 0.95 from TT Artisan. Now this thing is relatively sharp on its own, but then when you add all this extra glass and distortion and everything from the moment adapter, it definitely becomes very, very soft and not that great. Definitely stop down to something like F2. It's a fantastic performer and they pair really, really well. But if you want that very dreamy kind of look, this is kind of what you're gonna get out of that 50 millimeter. Then I also used the 90 millimeter f1.25 from TT Artisan as well. Both of those are just absolute monsters when you add the moment adapter to it. Pretty interesting. Again, it's one of those things where at 1.25 wide open, it's not that great once you add the adapter to it, but some pretty interesting stuff for sure. We also used the 90 millimeter macro lens. It works pretty well as well. Nothing too crazy. I feel like this is probably the most boring out of all of them, but also just worked pretty well. And then we also used the 135 1.8. Now this is giving you a ton of compression, a very shallow depth of field, quite the look there, but a really, really fantastic image. And obviously 135 isn't going to be something you're always going to be needing necessarily, but for like a portrait, that kind of stuff, it was pretty interesting. Another interesting thing that I found that doesn't always work, but does sometimes, a major kind of characteristic of anamorphic lenses is that they don't often allow you to focus very close. A lot of times you have to buy like a diopter or something to stick on the front. But because you do have the option of actually using the focus on the original lens back here, you can start to pull that back as well. And yes, you're gonna get some imperfections, and especially on some of the lenses that aren't as sharp, but you can focus very, very, very close on a few of these lenses and still get some usable stuff that you normally wouldn't be able to get on an anamorphic lens without one of those diopter filters. And for the most ridiculous combination of the bunch, I used the Shure 50 millimeter f1.8. It's a Super 35 1.33 anamorphic lens, and tossed the Moment 1.33 adapter onto the front of it. So you'll be able to see how ridiculous this looks. And this definitely looks like a periscope or something, or like something that a pirate would be using. But if you're going to use this on a Super 35 crop, it made for some really, really interesting things because you're pairing kind of like the blue streaks and the original information out of the Shure lens with the more gold flares and things out of the Moment adapter, giving you what would be kind of a character explosion of sorts if you're using something like this. So overall, it's been super fun to use. I'm definitely going to use it quite a bit more. Might bring it out for some wedding portraits, things like that. And if you have any more questions or suggestions of what you'd like to see with it, let me know in the comments down below. It's a pretty cool little concept. If you are interested in this, obviously I will put links in the description down below to check it out. I do believe they have them in stock now, so if you, again, are interested, you can grab one. And then if you want to see more anamorphic stuff from me, you can check out my video on the Shure 50 1.8. And if you want to see more about just my general movement into video and why I love the FX3 so much, you can check that video up here, and I will see you all on the next one.